Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us today and welcome you to another Oracle EPM Cloud Education session from Novis. And today we will be sharing with you some of the new features that are available within the Oracle EPM Cloud. The content for today's presentation will be broken down into four parts. We're going to talk briefly about Novis, who we are and what we do. And then we're going to spend some time going through the new features today that are available in the Oracle EPM Cloud, specifically account reconciliation, planning and budgeting, consolidation and close, and we have a new feature that we're going to cover that's common across all the EPM modules. So let's get started. A little bit about Novis. Novis is a full service provider of consulting services leveraging the Oracle EPM product stack for both cloud and on-premise environments. We have been an Oracle partner since 2012 and are recognized as a cloud excellence implementer, leveraging the Oracle EPM cloud products. All of our resources work closely with both the users as well as Oracle product development to ensure that our clients are benefiting from the full feature sets that are available within the Oracle EPM cloud. Ultimately, we are striving to be that trusted advisor for our clients and to help them realize their vision of performance management and business analytics. We work exclusively with Oracle products, and not only are we an Oracle partner, but we also are a customer, and we use Oracle EPM Cloud tools within our organization today to manage our own EPM processes. A little bit about myself. My name is RJ Lenahan. I'm a managing partner at Novis. I've been working in the EPM BI space for over 20 years. I started in the late 90s, working on the customer side for an FP&A department at an insurance company in New York. And I was using the Hyperion Enterprise and S-based tools in my day-to-day activities. I then moved over to consulting in the late 2000s, and my experience in the EPM space expanded from there. I started Novis in 2012 and worked to make it the premier Oracle EPM implementer. I have held a senior role on over 75 projects during my tenure in the EPM space. I'm also now going to introduce you to a couple of the other people that will be participating in today's presentation. Gary, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, RJ. I'm Gary Soreo, Vice President in charge of project delivery for Novis. I've been working in the EPM BI consulting space for the better part of the last 10 years. I started on the client side and then later moved on to consulting with EPM. I joined Novis back in 2012, and since then I've been working closely with our team to become a successful EPM implementer and always a trusted advisor to our clients.
Great, thanks, Gary. And Krishna, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Ajay. Hi, everyone. I'm Krishna. I've been in the EPM BI space and data warehousing space for over 17 years now. Architected multiple end-to-end solutions. I'm a project lead at Novis here, being with the company for over a year.
Great. Thanks, Krishna. And our newest addition to our webinar series, this is her first time out. Lori, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you. My name is Lori Wilborg. I have been working with EPM products, especially on the functional side, for over 10 plus years. I've been consulting with Novis for about a year now. So I've used all the products extensively, and I have done extensive documentation, training, things of that sort.
Great. Glad to have you, Lori.
Yep.
All right. So now that you know who is going to be participating in today's session, what we're going to kick things off, and again, today's format is going to be very different than what we've done in previous webinars. I'd like to start things off by just setting the stage for those of you who are not familiar with Oracle EPM Cloud Services, what is it and what does it support? So when we're talking about the Oracle EPM Cloud Services, I like people to think of two numbers, the numbers 1 and number 7. 1 being it is a unified platform to support 7 business processes that are owned by the finance and accounting group within an organization. And what are those business processes? Well, graphically, what we'd like to do is display that in what we call our EPM wheel. And what it does is it actually aligns and displays exactly how an organization goes through those business processes throughout their different reporting or process cycles. So if we start from number 1, typically an organization today will have ongoing financial transactions that need to be reconciled. So those transactions need to get reconciled through what we call the account reconciliation process. And as you get towards the end of that periodic process, we move on to number 2, which is consolidation and close. That's where an organization will spend the time to close their books, consolidate their results, so that they can in turn get ready for their reporting needs. Along the way, there might be some need as part of, before they get to that final reporting process, where they need to do some type of maybe tax reporting to support the reporting of their tax provision, as well as maybe a little bit more sophisticated analysis around profitability and cost management. That would be 3 and 4. And then finally, we get to what we call narrative reporting, number 5, which also could be including performance reporting. And again, those particular processes actually are supported all within the Oracle EPM Cloud service. The final one, number 6, is more along the line with, that's aligned with the FP&A group, where we have strategic and financial planning, number 6. And then finally, what I like to call the glue that keeps everything together, or is the foundation where everything is built on for these processes, number 7, enterprise data management. And that's the management of the dimensions and hierarchies across all of these different business processes, which obviously are sharing data as you're going through and supporting these business processes. So as I mentioned earlier, today we are going to be focused on sharing new features with numbers 1, 2, 6, and actually 3 as well, because one of them actually is applicable to 3. And then the last feature, as I mentioned, is going to be applicable to the entire platform. All right, and without further ado, we're going to kick things off first with account reconciliation. Lori, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
So back in May, there was a new feature released for account reconciliation. It's a new card that you'll see on the workspace, and it's for data exchange, which is Oracle's integration agent for account rec, which will enable you to load data through an integration agent instead of having to load flat files individually. So it integrates with your general ledger system or your sub-ledger system, whatever you're using, and it works with data management as well. So right now it's working in conjunction with data management. It'll enable you to take your source data and it extracts it, and then it'll bring it into the data management tool, and that will allow you to map and do what you need to do there to transform your data. It's helps you easily manage your load process, because again, you're taking away the whole manual step of like uploading files and doing things like that. And what they have done through this card is they have made it a very user-friendly interface. So you can, you can easily just go through the screens. So if you're familiar working with the cloud, it'll take you through a series of screens, and it also will take you back to data management. So it's important to note, like right now, this is not going to replace data management, but it's going to support a lot of the features that are currently in data management currently.
So Lori, real quick question here. What about drill through? Is that supported at all with this process?
Yes, you can set up your drill through back to a source of a subledger, or if you have a source system, maybe like a bank file, things of that nature.
So when you said data management does not replace, or the exchange card does not replace data management, what is it that the card does specifically that data management will not be doing?
The card will help enable you, for example, if you're an EBS customer, it'll help you write the queries you need to talk back to your EBS ledger. And it's very simple. You can go in there, you put your queries in, and then that will integrate with data management.
Something else just to point out is this is a new feature for account reconciliation, but the integration agent is available for the other EPM products right now in the cloud, correct?
It is.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember when it first came out in November, and we were kind of like, wow, this is a feature that we really wanted, because everyone was like, oh, flat files. That's, before this, we were stuck with flat files. But do we find it? I think you guys are starting to gravitate towards it and realize that this is definitely the future. Sort of like maybe a legacy load rule with SQL interface, maybe. Or?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what it's like. So if anybody on here or is watching this is used to, load rules in SBase and EAS, where you could actually tap directly into a relational source and use a SQL query, this is exactly what that's like. So yeah, absolutely.
Is it bidirectional? Can you write back to the source?
You cannot write back to the source.
But it is only bidirectional in the sense that you can read data by drilling back through to the source. But yes, you can't. At this time, you can't use the integration. You can write back to the source. You still have to create some type of extract and load to another system.
Push back. Okay. All right. Why don't we let's take a look at it, Lori. Maybe you can show us. Actually, there you go.
Okay, so basically on the left-hand side, you'll see the EPM agent sits right in between your on-premise solution or whatever you're using. So you would go from your ledger to the EPM agent, and then you go back into ARCs that way. And then you can see it works with cloud, it works with on-premise. So you can do a host of different things as soon as you understand how to configure it and use it. Again, it'll take the place of doing manual data loads.
So how easy is it to configure this?
I would say there is some thought involved, especially if you're going to use queries or something like that. You want to make sure you understand your data source so you know what to pull. So I think that's your biggest hurdle. I don't think you would agree, but right?
So it seems like there's definitely an effort in understanding how to pull the data from the source. But then, Krishna, can you I know you've set up the agent itself. How hard is that process?
Setting up the agent is very simple. It's really
because Krishna's doing it. If it was RJ doing it, it would be very hard.
It is certainly simple. It's again, as Tony said, getting the SQL query right, getting your data right out of the system, and loading it into the target. Configuration itself is relatively simple. You just have to remember there's multiple ways to configure it. Like you have this synchronous and asynchronous methods to do it. So depending on your needs, you have to decide. And again, asynchronous is very simple, and that's what we use for our clients.
Cool. All right, we got about another 1 to 2 minutes on this topic because we want to make sure we get everything in. I think, Laura, you mentioned this is what it looks like in the cloud, and you have a couple of screenshots on what it looks like.
Correct. So if you look at the upper right-hand shot, once you set up your data integrations, you will see them here. So like in this example, there was an integration set up for a GL load, fixed assets load, subledger load. And then down at the left bottom is the process details, which you would probably also be used to seeing in data management as well if you look at your jobs and how they're processing. So they're bringing it all here into this one card.
The data exchange card itself, it's got to be about a year old, because otherwise we used to go, or we still have, you still can go back to the legacy window that launches data management.
Yeah.
But Oracle's getting closer to.
When the data exchange card first showed up, it was specifically for data maps and smart pushes, and then they incorporated some of the data management functionality. Yeah. Now they've actually made it available in other applications. So.
All right. I think we can close out account recs, but I think we'll, we probably should come up with some kind of rating system, Cisco Lever. Yeah. Next session, we'll figure it out. Yeah, we'll come up with
an 8.5.
Thumbs up or thumbs down. All right, let's move on to our next new feature, which Krishna's going to cover. Go ahead, Krishna.
Thanks, Arjun. So planning and budgeting, consolidation, close, tax reporting. All these three modules use flex forms that was introduced in April 2020. I really like this feature, and I'm sure end users agree with me on that. So this flex form is a new kind of a form which is as simple as checking a box to make a regular simple form during the form design, a flex form. And as it's named, the flex form it gives you more flexibility as an end user. You can add rows. So you can just type in a member name and refresh the form, and a new row with that member shows up in the form. And you can rearrange your rows. That's something that users have always had an issue with, where they cannot sort the rows. If it's a really long form with many members in the form, then it's just, you can just sort the form. You can even filter the rows. So these features are still not available in a simple form, but with a flex form, you can do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's, again, as I said, it's as simple as enabling it in the web designer. Again, you have to enable it in the web designer. A flex form is applicable only to Smart View. For inserting rows and sorting rows, you cannot do all those things on the web. And then every time you change the layout of the form, you do have to submit the form. You refresh the form. If you refresh the form, the submit button gets enabled, otherwise it's not enabled. So the system can read the rearranged forms and get the data correct. And again, this it gives the end user flexibility, but one drawback I do see is it's applicable only for the session. So as long as the user is connected and working in the form, they can change the layout, they can add the rows however they want to, or rearrange the rows, but once the session is done, you've lost all those changes.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that was a big question. It's like, what is the use case? Why use the flex forms? And I think you've had experience at one of our clients with using them, and they like it, but there's a specific reason why. You can share a little bit more of that experience.
Yeah, again, as I said, if you have really a large number of rows, say a specific department enters data for the rest of the company for, again, specific accounts like HR, enters overtime or some kind of benefit information for every department in the company. Then they see hundreds of rows, and if they want to be able to enter data only for specific rows, then they should be able to filter or sort the data. It just makes it easier. This was not available, still not available in a simple form.
I see. So in other words, it's sort of bringing some, like, maybe Excel functionality.
Excel functionality, yes. So you do see the sort and filter enabled now. When
you got a screenshot of that, don't you?
I will show that slide.
Yeah, go ahead.
You can actually even, as I said,
You got to use the mouse, not your computer.
Okay, so in the web designer, all you would do is check the box that says enable flex form. You do need a specific version of Smart View for flex form to work. Otherwise, it just forms. It performs just like a simple form if you're using an older version of Smart View. And the flex form specifically has those double arrows that you see. That's how it looks in Smart View when you try to open it. Okay, so one of the things that you can do, that another use case is, let's say you were using, in your form you show historical actuals and you have your budget, and obviously you haven't entered any budget yet. If it's a new product or a new account that does not have any history, then it does not show up on your form if you have suppressed rows enabled. In that case, you can just go in and type in, insert a row, or type in the member name and refresh the form, and you will see the row is inserted, and you can see the submit, because once you refresh, you enter the data and submit the form, it actually even places that specific member in the right hierarchy also. Like in this example here, this is revenue. You went through and inserted at the last line, but you want to look at your gross profit, and it does insert it in the right.
Okay, so no matter where you insert it on the form, once it saves and refreshes, it's going to put it in the correct place in the hierarchy.
Yeah, that way you're not losing your subtotals.
Okay. Which is good, because then the user, when they go to edit, doesn't necessarily need to know exactly where that member belongs in the hierarchy.
No, that's right. Are there any like limitations or things that we should at least be concerned? You mentioned the version of Smart View as one. I just wonder if there's any others.
Yes, so there are limitations. Given that the layout is flexible now, you cannot use your row formulas or column formulas. You cannot use validations, because that's essentially your data validation in a form is tied to a cell reference.
Mhm.
Your reference is changing when you insert a row,
Mhm.
or you change the rows. You cannot even use the dynamically adding a dimension. So you can have there was a new feature that was introduced some time back where you could pick a specific dimension member from a drop down.
Mhm.
You can't do that with this. And that's the reason you can actually just type in the member name and hit refresh.
So you have to understand what features you want available before you use flex forms, because there are other alternatives to accomplishing this, but maybe it's like there was like ad hoc forms or something you guys mentioned.
Yeah, so maybe you want to spend a minute talking about the difference between an ad hoc form and a flex form.
Yeah, so this flex form does behave a lot like ad hoc, where the user has the option to change rows and columns. Of course, in flex form, you cannot change columns. Your columns are fixed. Your rows are flexible. But with an ad hoc, I think a big disadvantage is if you had any business rule or validations tied to a form, those don't work in ad hoc. So users can submit data and nothing happens.
Right.
The aggregations run and they don't see any aggregated data. So that's the reason flex form, it's good to use the web forms or the forms that are built, but you have certain limitations.
Yeah.
So
That's why I actually found that using ad hoc forms is a good way, especially if users are new to EPM and using planning and Essbase, giving them the ability to create an ad hoc form is actually a good way to come up with a form specification, because then you can understand, oh, this is how I want to see the data and enter the data. Then we can turn that into an actual data form and attach validation and business rules and things like that. So I'd say that's how the two could work hand in hand for sure.
Nice.
one thing I do want to mention is when I said validations, so with forms, validations work, but with flex forms, validations don't work because of the cell reference.
Yes.
So that's where Groovy comes in. You can
Okay.
use Groovy because Groovy can read the grid as the grid is built. So Groovy validations are still valid. So your form functionality is not lost in that way.
Oh, interesting.
So using traditional validation rules on the form isn't gonna work, but
Because they're relative references.
Yes.
Got it. But Groovy doesn't care because it's building, or it's processing as the form is being built.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. Cool. All right. Great information. So that's flex forms. I think we're going to now move on to consolidation and close, and we'll pass it off to Gary.
Yeah, thank you. So today, specifically the new feature for consolidation and close that we're going to talk about today is the addition to so there's pre-existing functionality within FCCS, and it's called an activity report. And they've added an additional piece of information to that report that shows you the top 5 consolidation and translation jobs by duration. And that was just released back in April of this year. So when it comes to the activity report itself, which is the pre-existing functionality, it's a report that's automatically generated nightly during the normal maintenance process. And it allows service administrators to better understand the application and how it's being used. So it also helps streamline the design of the application because we can understand length of time that calc scripts and rules are running, how long user requests are taking, and the impacts that those are having on the overall application performance. So then service administrators would use this activity report to identify, issues that users may be having, performance issues with calculations. There's a full list here on the slide that we have up right now that kind of shows you all the information that's available within the activity report. And then what I have highlighted there specifically is what we're going to talk about today, which is the top 5 consolidation and translation jobs by duration. So again, you have this pre-existing activity report, which now has an additional section for the top 5 jobs by duration. And this is using the consolidation performance diagnostic logs to help you troubleshoot if you might be having issues with your consolidations or your translations. So first thing you have to do is you have to enable consolidation rules logging within your application settings to make sure that this will appear in your report. And then what I have on the screen right now is just a little snapshot of the report itself and what that specific functionality looks like, and we'll talk about that in a little more detail in a minute. So specifically, the functionality that we're talking about here reports on a maximum of 5 jobs, and it's going to focus on the 5 jobs that take the most processing time. So for each of those jobs, the table is going to identify for you not only the job itself, but the rule template within that job that's taking up the most processing time. And it's also going to tell you the number of entities that are being processed by that rule that's running. So in order to enable this, the first thing you need to do is somebody who's a service administrator would have to go into the application settings and make sure that you're choosing the yes option for the enable consolidation rules logging, which is the section that I have highlighted in the screenshot. After you do that, you're going to want to go and actually run the consolidate, whether it's multiple consolidations or a consolidation and a translation. You want to run those rules to make sure that they run in the application at that point in time. And then what you need to do is you need to actually run a reset service. So using the EPM Automate utility, you have to run a reset service on that environment so that the report gets generated. So one thing I want to point out here is this report is going to get generated for you on a nightly basis. Every time your maintenance window runs, it also does a reset service, and it's going to create an activity report for you. Now, if for some reason you do want to, you're troubleshooting a consolidation or translation, or you're seeing some type of performance issue and you want to run it intraday, it is going to require that you go in on your own into the EPM Automate utility and run a reset service in order to generate the latest report.
So you wouldn't want to run this during the day.
So it's, yes, it's
if you're during your close process.
Exactly. So especially then, I mean, generally you're not going to want to run this in a production environment during the day when you have users in there, unless you know that there's a period of time that you can have the system, not up and running. But yeah, I would say during a close process, this is something you're going to want to continue to happen during your nightly refresh. Not necessarily, or during your maintenance period, not during.
Who's using the report? Who's this? Yeah.
So this is going to be an admin, an application admin, a service administrator is going to be the type of, or even a developer. If we're developing an FCCS application for a customer and we're running into some performance issues with consolidations or translations, we would absolutely use this report as well to kind of pinpoint what's going on. It's the most visibility you can get aside from just, the normal benchmarking, your timing, how long things are running for. So after you run that reset service, you can navigate to the application card and then the overview section. And within the overview section, you have the activity reports. And from there, you'll see the latest activity report that was run. So if, you'll see one for every single day because it gets run every day. If you were to do a manual reset service, you're going to see another one appear there. And it does keep a running record of all of the reports that have been run in the past so that you could go back to any point in time and see what's changed from then until now.
And looks like there's a timestamp here. So even if you run the same report, or if you run the report twice in a day or multiple times in a day.
Exactly. So yes, so you don't have to worry about it overwriting daily, but then you also don't have to worry about it overwriting historical as well, because yes, you're getting that specific timestamp. So that's good functionality as well. So then what it does is it gives you the ability to either view that report in the web, or you can actually download a copy of that report. And once that report opens up, and this looks familiar to you because I was just displaying it on the screen before, but this report again is going to show you those 5 jobs that are taking the most processing time. And for each of those jobs, it's going to identify the rule template as well as the number of entities that are being processed. Now, what you want to focus on with the report is first the duration column, so that indicates how long the calculation is taking. However, because you could be running multiple cores and the ability to calculate, you have the ability to calculate in parallel, duration isn't always indicative of actual processing time. So for example, if the processing time is 10 minutes, but you're running 10 cores, the duration is only going to be 1 minute. So in that sense, you want to start by looking at the duration column because that's going to match with what's in your logs and your tables. But to identify actual processing bottlenecks or issues, you want to focus on the CPU time column. So by looking at the CPU time column, you're going to get a true indicator of a slow operation. So any row on this table that has a high CPU indicator column or CPU time indicator, that's a candidate for potential optimization.
Got it. And at that point, then you go and do further digging based on what was the bottleneck and figure out how to resolve
exactly right.
the performance issue. You had, and I may have missed this, you had mentioned earlier about EPM Automate. Can this report, as well as like some of the other logs, be automatically downloaded to a maybe on-prem so that they could be either saved off or accessed a different way? Or
so at this point, it's my understanding that there's not. So you could obviously have EPM Automate run the reset service. If you want to run a scheduled reset service to generate the report, you could do that. But it's still a manual process if you want to download it locally. I would imagine, if there were enough requests or, if we spoke to product development, that would be something they could add to.
Yeah,
It gives you the ability to download the.
And they're constantly updating EPM Automate with new features and functions all the time. So
Right,
we want to keep an eye out.
And that's it. That's the enhanced activity
Cool.
report for FCCS.
So yeah, again, I think we think this is a pretty important feature, especially for those customers that potentially could run into a performance hurdle when running their consolidation close process. This is one of the tools that they have access to overcome that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Okay, and we are now down to the last, hold on, just want to do a time check here. We got 12:32. The last new feature of the day is common across all of the EPM modules. And it might be something that you are not readily familiar with. Our thought was when we were kind of going through and picking out these new features for this first session, at first this one didn't really seem that important, but we've actually run into this actual scenario in a couple of customers. So it all of a sudden, boom, got moved to the top of the list. It was released last September in 2019. And what it is it's about relocating an EPM cloud environment to a different identity domain. Right? So what does that mean? Right? Well, the feature itself allows you to change the default domain for an Oracle EPM cloud environment. Right? So why would we want to do this? Well, the true reason or the use case, and we have a couple of use cases that we're going to go through, is all about being able to either centralize or separate the management of your domain users. Okay, and it's primarily, obviously, security related, both external and native security. But obviously, when you're moving an environment from one domain to another, anything that's available within the domain itself obviously becomes streamlined, and you can have one centralized or one central maintenance point to be able to manage the domain. But so what does that benefit? It provides the ability to support different security requirements as well as to improve the approach to user maintenance. Right. So this hopefully will start to allude in or provide the ability to let you know where there's some benefits here. So let's talk about the first use case of why we want to use this new feature. The first use case is about relocating a new EPM environment to an existing domain which hosts an existing EPM environment. Right? So why would we want to do this? At the end of the day, this is pretty much one of the core reasons for doing it. It's to reduce the user maintenance and duplication of effort when it comes to managing security. So in our example, what we have here are 3 EPM environments that have both the test and prod. And our first 2 environments are part of the identity domain 1. And then down the road, a new environment was a provision for the customer, and that was assigned to identity domain 2. There would be a justification or use case to say, hey, that new EPM environment follows or has the same security architecture as the existing domain. So we would want to relocate or reassign that third EPM environment, both the test and prod, to identity domain 1. Right? So again, and the whole goal here is all about reducing, maintenance and security. All right. I think we have a similar situation do we have a similar situation with the customer for that, or that's more related to data center, which we'll get to in a minute? Okay, all right. So let's move on now to use case number 2, which is where what you may want to do is relocate an existing EPM environment to a new EPM environment in a new domain. So why would we want to do this? All right. We want to basically make sure that we segregate security to satisfy requirements such as SOX compliance or human resources. Often when we're building out a workforce planning application, human resources might have very specific requirements when it comes to actually protecting sensitive data that is loaded to a workforce application. So in our use case example that we have now for for use case 2, again, we have our 3 different EPM environments that are all part of the same identity domain. But what we want to do is, and I'm using EPM environment 1 as an example. EPM environment 1, we might want to move it or relocate it to an identity domain number 2 to segregate security. Because EPM environment 2 might be, we're running consolidation and close. And in order to adhere to SOX compliance, we need to make sure that we have a completely separate security architecture supported on a separate domain in order to satisfy SOX, right? So this would be a reason why we'd want to do a relocation of an EPM environment to a separate identity domain, okay? And this is a little bit misleading here for this example. I'm realizing it just now because there are some limitations that we're going to go through at the end of our use cases. So the way I'm presenting it may not necessarily be the way that we approach it, but it's very similar and applicable, okay? Use case number 3. We are going to, in this use case, we may want to locate a set of environments with a common identity domain and have a second pair of environments that we would want as part of another identity domain. So why we want to do this, again, very similar to use case 2, where there's a segregation there's a requirement to segregate security to satisfy access requirements across environment types. This probably is more applicable to maybe large organizations where they are insisting on having multiple environments in order to support the different types of activities that occur within the EPM process or solution. They might have a development environment, a test, a UAT, and a production. And more often when we've seen these types of configuration, security for development and test is compartmentalized or paired up, and that satisfies one set of security requirements, where UAT and production would be a different set of security requirements. So there might be a need to make sure that we locate environment number 1 on identity domain number 2 so that we have that segregation of duty, okay? So with that, I'm going to move on to some of the points that we need to consider, and these are not all of them. There are a number of them. These are the key ones that we want to make you aware of. The first being that, and the most important, and now I think this is going to be applicable to and I'll pass it off to Gary and Krishna, because you were involved in the division as well with that, right?
No.
Sir, no? Oh, putting you on the spot, sorry. The source and target identity domains must be in the same data center. That is key. In order to be able to relocate an environment from one domain to another, both those domains have to be in the same data center. And we ran into this challenge just recently. Maybe you can share a little bit about high level.
Yes, I mean, in the particular example that RJ is referring to, we needed to consolidate. Well, in one instance, we needed to separate environments. In the other instance, we needed to consolidate environments. In the case of them consolidating, they were actually in separate data centers. They weren't in the same data center. So that's not as seamless of a process, because that's not something that you can do from a self-service perspective. But you can reach out to Oracle if you're having an issue where you're in a different data center and you do need to consolidate environments, and they can kind of advise you on what the best approach is. But from the point of view of being in the same data center and wanting to consolidate environments, this process is great, because instead of having to reach out to Oracle and specifically tell them where you want to move things, you now have the ability to kind of a service administrator can do that on their own. So I think this is great functionality.
Yeah. That actually is tied to the last bullet point. I guess we're going to go a little bit out of order here, which is, I'm going to jump down to the last bullet point. Identity domains cannot be created as part of the relocation process. So if you look at our use cases, the examples, it almost looks like we're creating a new identity domain. That's not possible. It's when the environment is provisioned. What you want to make sure happens is, in order to have this flexibility, you want one environment to be provisioned in one identity domain, and a second environment, make sure that environment is provisioned in a second identity domain, so that you have two identity domains to work with. All right. It's interesting. What we haven't come across yet, I don't think, is if we have two separate environments, two separate identity domains, and we take the environment over here, we'll call this environment number 2 and identity domain number 2. If we were to move that environment over to environment 1 and identity domain 1, what happens to identity domain 2? We don't know that, do we?
No, we don't.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these are some questions here that we're kind of coming up here that we definitely haven't crossed yet. But again, just getting back to that bullet point, this is not about, okay, I have two environments, they're on the same identity domain. I want to go now and move one of those environments to a new identity domain. I want to create that identity domain. That's not relevant here. Okay, that's a different issue that would need to be addressed. Okay, now we'll jump back up to environments must have been provisioned after May 16, 2016. That's noted in the documentation. We don't have a specific reason as to why. We expect, though, that there were a number of different changes to the Oracle EPM cloud environments around that time, so we suspect that has something to do with the versioning. But again, what we're talking about here is applicable to any environment that's provisioned after May 16, 2016. And then the last two the next two bullet points are really around making sure that you have consistency across the identity domains. Both the source and target identity domain need to have been provisioned with the same customer account. I think from our experience, most of our customers, as they've added new identity or new environments with new identity domains, they're always referring to the person who signed the ordering document who ends up having the account associated with them, so it's usually the same. So just keep an eye out for that. We want to make sure that it's the same account that was provisioned across both environments. And then finally, the administrator, the person who's actually doing it, which I think is a huge strength. You know, if all conditions are met, you don't even need Oracle to do this. You can do this on your own. But the administrator has to have the proper access across both the source and target domains in order to relocate the environment, which I mean, at the end of the day, I think the role is domain administrator, right?
Identity domain
Administrator, yeah. So, okay. All right, so that's about it. I don't think we had any questions around that one. I mean, again, not a highly touted new feature, but for specific, I mean, we've already come across it at 2 different clients, so it is important, but I think it's more important at the beginning of an implementation when you're configuring the environments and making sure, more importantly, that you work with your sales rep to make sure that these environments are configured properly out of the gate. Okay. All right, and with that, we're going to close our session. We're almost at 12:45, which is where we said we'd finish. We'd like to remind you to keep an eye out for our next EPM new features session. We're targeting the week of August 10th, which is within the next 2 weeks. And again, we'll be focusing on different new features within the Oracle EPM Cloud Stack. Feel free, if there's a new feature that you want us to talk about, to reach out and let us know. We'd appreciate that. And with that, everyone wants to say goodbye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day and a great weekend.